Ready for chapter 8? Looks scary. Those early days were among the hardest of Martine's life. At times she felt as if she was still undergoing some sort of test, almost as if she was being prepared for something. Everything added to her sense of isolation. It was like being a castaway on a desert island. There was no one she could turn to for comfort or advice, no one who would hold her if she cried, certainly not her grandmother. Still, she couldn't help noticing that whatever she was feeling particularly upset or down, Gwen Thomas would suddenly and unexpectedly make an apricot pie for dinner and serve it up with whipped cream, or leave a vase of wild flowers on her bedside table, or say something like, "Martine, I could do with your help when I go to feed the baby elephant tonight." The little elephant lived in an enclosure in the sanctuary close to Tenday's house. He had been rescued from a Zambian zoo and had gone on out of business. Tenday had named him Shaka, after the legendary Zulu warrior king. So he'd grow up to be the great leader for the herd despite his early trials, just like Shaka, was his remark to Martine. Shaka was one of the several animals in the sanctuary, which was sort of a hospital and holding area for new arrivals before they were relocated to the main game reserve. At present, Tunde and Samson, the wizened, white-haired man, who looked to be at least 104 years old, were tending to a jackal that had been hit by a car and had a leg in a cast, and an owl with an infected eye, a springbok with a nasty abscess, and an orphan bush baby. The bush baby was one of the sweetest creatures Martine had ever seen, with huge brown eyes and tiny gray ape-like face, a long curling tail, and paws like a koala made for climbing. One of Martine's chores was to make sure that the sanctuary animals had water morning and evening, and she also had been allowed to feed Shaka 3 times. Once she was giggling at his wobbly gait and funny pink mouth gulping at his milk pail. She caught her grandmother watching her with an almost pleased expression. But even on those occasions when she seemed to be making an effort to be nice, Martine still couldn't shake the feeling that her grandmother did not want her there. Much to her frustration, she hadn't been allowed into the game reserve itself. Martine consoled herself with the thought that at least she could see the wildlife through the fence, and devoted all her spare time to reading up on the animals in the books that she'd found in her room. She'd been fascinated by the facts she'd learned about giraffes. For instance, the spots on each giraffe are as unique as fingerprints. No two are alike. And although their necks are very long, they have the same number of vertebrae as other mammals, 7. Nowhere did she find any mention of white giraffes. It was the animal that it was the animals that made Martine's life bearable. She never imagined she would live in a place with lions at the bottom of the garden. At night, when they were hunting, she could hear their spine-tingling roars, and just knowing she was so close to them was just unbelievably thrilling. Curiously, creatures of all shapes and sizes seemed to instinctively know when she needed a friend. Take her grandmother's cats, Warrior and Shelby. They showed no interest in Martine at all except for when she was feeling miserable, and then she could hardly move without them rubbing themselves up against her legs and clamoring to sleep on her bed. And on 2 occasions the baboons had appeared in the garden when she had an awfully bad day at school and performed so many funny antics that she got a cramp from laughing. The second time it happened, Tende came to the house on an errand while Martine was watching them. He crept up beside her and he said teasingly, "So, little one, this is what you get up this is what you get up to when you're supposed to be doing your homework?" Martine was sputtering an excuse when he cut her off with a chuckle. He told her that according to the Zulu folklore, the baboons had once been lazy field hands. Instead of removing weeds from the crops, they spent their days sitting on their hoes, gossiping, or sleeping in the sunshine. They sat there for so long that eventually their hoes became their tails, and the weeds attached themselves to their bodies and became their hairs. "Better watch out," Tende said. "If you sit here too long without doing your homework, you might grow a tail, and we'll have to put you in the game reserve." He grinned over her shoulder. "Isn't that right, Mrs. Thomas?" Martine swung around and guiltily to find her grandmother shaking with mirth. Her blue eyes were dancing. "10-day, Gwen Thomas managed at last. You are pure gold." But none of this stopped Martine from lying awake at night aching for her mom and dad, or from wondering about the secrets of Sambuana. After nearly 3 weeks on the game reserve, she was convinced that Grace was right. There was a wall of silence there. Everything she asked about was met with the same blank response. "A white giraffe?" exclaimed her grandmother when Martine mentioned the tale 10-day had told her, as if a white giraffe could go missing in Zimbabwe. But 10-day said he saw some tracks. "Martine, if there was a giraffe in the game reserve, don't you think that 10-day, who can track the path of a python across a bare rock, would have found it by now?" Martine had to admit her grandmother did have a point, but there were other secrets. For starters, there was the mystery of why her grandmother was on a mission to keep her out of the game reserve. And there was no question that that was going on. Zimbabwe was a private reserve owned by her grandmother, but on weekdays it opened to tourists and visitors who pre-booked appointments. They were guided around by the game warden, Alex Duprez, or Gwen Thomas herself. That still left the weekends. Yet every Saturday her grandmother had 1,000 excuses for not allowing Martine to go into the reserve. From a shortage of staff to the late delivery of fuel, you wouldn't want 10-day to run out of petrol while you're charging when a charging elephant was around, would you, Martine? She also heard Gwen Thomas warning 10-day not to take Martine anywhere near Grace, to whom her grandmother again referred to her as that crazy old magic lady. "I won't have it," she told him. "I don't want you filling Martine's head with silly ideas. Grace is out of bounds as far as Martine is concerned." All of this added to an air of secrecy that Martine could almost touch. She snooped about as much as she could and eavesdropped on one or two of the conversations, but she discovered nothing that could answer her biggest question. Why had Mom never told her about this place? She found several books belonging to Veronica on her bookshelf, and now knew her mom had probably spent much of her life here. But there was nothing to explain why she never told Martine about it. Nor did Martine understand why her grandmother continued to maintain this stony silence on the subject. She found it odd that Gwen Thomas never once said a word about her own daughter. Even as she was still grieving, one would have thought she might occasionally say something like, "This was your mom's favorite meal," or "Your mom loved to play the piano." But no, there was nothing. There were plenty of photographs of her grandfather, a silver-haired version of Harrison Ford, with her mom's sparkling green eyes, but none of her mom and dad, or her grandmother even though her grandmother had described them in the letter to social services as the finest people I have ever known. And 10-day, who evidently did know something about her mom, refused point blank to give her any information. "Please, Miss Martine," he kept saying, "you must ask your grandmother." One evening, when Gwen Thomas seemed to be in an unusually good mood, Martine plucked up the courage to do just that. A huge storm was raging outside, and they had just eaten dinner. "Grandmother," Martine began, "before Mr. Gryce wrote to you, did you know about me?" "Well, of course I did, Martine," her grandmother said impatiently. "What kind of question is that?" "Then why didn't I know about you?" "That's your mother's business and none of yours," her grandmother said, her voice rising. "Your mother made decisions in order to protect you. If you knew why she'd done those things she did, you would be more grateful." "How can I be grateful when no one will tell me the truth?" Martine burst out. "Martine," thundered her grandmother, "I won't tolerate this rudeness. Go to bed at once." Martine jumped to her feet. "Fine," she said. "I will go to bed, but I'm going to find out the truth about my mom and everything else that's going around here, and nobody's going to stop me." Upstairs, Martine sat in her bed watching rain lash down on the window pane. It was pitch black outside. Tears ran down her face. She lost count of the number of times she'd cried since she'd moved to Africa. She wished she could be back in England with Miss Rose or Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, but somehow she knew in her heart that she was exactly where she was meant to be, in this wild, amazing place with its strange, hostile people. Everything her father had told her happens for a reason. Martine couldn't for the life of her imagine what reason that reason could possibly be, and right now she didn't care. She knew that she needed a friend. Outside, the wind slapped and banged around the house, and thunder cracked as if 1,000 boulders were breaking across the heavens. Lightning split the sky. Martine gasped. A white giraffe was standing beside the water hole, and it was looking straight at her. For a split second, their eyes locked, the small, sad girl and the slender young giraffe, and then the sky went dark. Martine pressed her face to the glass, desperate to see the white giraffe again, but it was impossible. There was no moon, and the rain was coming down in sheets. Martine felt so crushed she could hardly breathe. It was like getting the best present you could ever dream of, a pony, say, and then having it snatched away again before you even had a minute to enjoy it. It was almost too much for her to bear. She tried to pull herself together. Had she seen the white giraffe or hadn't she? Could it have been a trick of the light? From this distance, there is something almost ghostly about it. In the lightning blue flicker, it had a, a phosphorescent glow. But when she relived the instant their eyes had met, she was certain the white giraffe was out there. It had looked at her as though it was looking for her. Martine had a sudden urge to rush into the game park and find the shy creature. She knew there could be terrible consequences. She was forbidden from ever going into the game reserve by herself, and not even Tende would risk going in on foot after dark. Snakes, scorpions, lions, buffaloes, and even leopards were on the prowl at night, and many of them would be out hunting. Martine was well aware that if she disobeyed the order, she could be attacked, gorged, or worse. For a long time she sat at the window trying to decide what to do. She couldn't stop thinking about the white giraffe. At last she made up her mind. She took off her shorts she changed into after school and put her jeans, boots, and navy blue school windbreaker. Behind the bookcase she concealed the carved wooden box Mr. Morrison had given to her. She removed her flashlight and knife and put them in her back pocket. At the door of her bedroom she listened. The only sound was the slowing rain, muffled on the thickly thatched roof. As silently as she could, she tiptoed down the stairs. The timber boards were old, and with every creak Martine fully expected to hear her grandmother's enraged shriek or feel her hand on her shoulder, but nothing stirred. When she reached the kitchen, she stood for several minutes, breathing deeply and taking comfort in the reassuring hum of the fridge. Then she unlocked the kitchen door. There was something very final about the click it made as it swung shut behind her. She checked her watch. It was 1 minute past midnight.